Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PCFX Fan Club podcast. I'm Ben, here alone because it's an intro to a interview episode. So David Shadoff is returning to us once again. If you don't remember David, he is involved in the homebrew scene for the PCFX. He developed the mouse adapter, that non-volatile memory backup thing, so basically the memory card for the PCFX, and has over time and also just been generally researching the system to try to better understand it. So we wanted to bring him back on the show because a handful of things happened with him. One, just we want to hear about his recent updates on working on the PCFX hardware, and also his general thoughts on the kind of future of where things are going based off what's happening now. And then also we wanted to talk to him because he this year went to Japan and went to a Hudson event. And so we wanted to hear a little bit about that. And he gave us an opportunity to ask questions of a ChipChanKick programmer. So we were able to send them those questions and learn a little bit more about the development of ChipChanKick from the eyes of a programmer. Also, just a quick interjection here. We're going to be trying to do a 30th anniversary PCFX episode that involves the community. So if you guys want, we'd be happy to see your guys' PCFX collections. Also hear a little bit about, what you like about the PCFX and get some idea about the games you've beaten and what your favorite games are on the Discord or the Ko-fi page. And I'll have a link in the description as well. We're going to have a form you can fill out, and it'll let you upload pictures of your collection and things like that. And then on that episode, ideally, if we have enough, we'll go through those collections and talk about them a little bit, and also just hear a little bit about what you guys like about the PCFX itself. So if you want to participate in that, please submit through that form by December 1st, 2024 at the latest. That's a Sunday, but December 1st, 2024 will be the cutoff. So go ahead and submit that as soon as you can. David, tell me, I don't know how much you want to say, but how much are you willing to say about your trip to Japan? And, how did things go? And we'll talk about that event after you get started there, I think.
Yeah, sure. So I went to Japan in middle of May to the end of May this year. I go there frequently, so each time I try to go to different places, and I always end up in Tokyo for a bit, and other places. This time I went to Onomichi and some place at the north end of Shikoku, but I don't remember the name. It was a town. Very nice. I think I'm tending towards the smaller towns now that I have a little bit more comfort with the language, but I just want to stay away from tourists mostly.
Last time I went, I stayed in Asakusa on both my trips, and the second time I went, it was night and day difference between the number of foreigners. It was crazy. Which, it was already a tourist location before, but
right.
That second time it was this is after, they reopened after 2020 everything, and it was just flooded with foreigners. So
yeah, it's especially that kind of place. Everybody loves it. It's really nice. The food is amazing. The people are wonderful, but it's kind of like the tourists sort of get in the way of the experience, I think.
Yeah. Is this your last time you went to Japan? Were you going out to the more smaller towns as well, or is this a newer thing for you on this trip specifically that you did?
Well, I've been to a bunch of different cities, but they've usually been cities. This was a little bit smaller towns, like a 500,000 kind of thing, which is still a city in North America, but in Japan it's wow, that's rural, is what people say.
Was it a castle town or?
Well, that's interesting because the one place, it was a castle town, but the castle was just ruins. It was just this.
Oh wow! Yep.
And I was like, I came here for this, really? But they had really good food, I gotta say. So it wasn't a waste at all. But Onomichi was really sleepy, really a small, sleepy town.
Did anything specifically bring you to any of those towns, or was it more of just, hey, here's a town I could go to, and you just kind of show up?
So I really like the area between Osaka and Hiroshima. So they call that the Seto Naikai, or Seto Inland Sea. They have a lot of, for some reason, Japanese citrus is really interesting to me. And they have a lot of interesting products, a lot of interesting foods. And it the sort of the lifestyle is a little slower than the big cities, but still not so slow that it's sleepy.
Yeah. Well, cool. Now I saw on your notes here that you wanted to talk about your PCFX software experience. Like, I guess what PCFX software you saw while you're in Japan,
Yeah.
or
Basically, every other time that I've gone before, you
Mhm.
go into Akihabara, you can find, a few stray PCFX things in like Trader
Mhm.
or Super Potato. There was nothing,
Mm.
zero. I
Interesting.
saw I saw maybe 5 titles in a shop in Nakano Broadway,
Mhm.
but Tokyo was just completely stripped of
Yeah.
PCFX.
I'm curious if because I know the prices on PCFX games have gone up quite a bit. I don't know when that kind of started. I mean, there's always been the expensive games, right? But I feel like generally we're starting to the point where even the cheaper games are getting up into that like $40 to $80 range, right? Would that would you guys say that's accurate in terms of
Yep.
US dollar? Sorry, I know you're
Yeah, at least 20 and up. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say 20 and up.
20 up? Okay.
Like your mid-range game is going to be about 5,000 yen, which is maybe 30-35 US
Yeah.
dollars. And then they just go like everything in Japan. You can go basic, you can go middle, or you can like there's no limit.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess like in asking that, I wonder when people are buying PCFX games, at least in like Tokyo or something like that. I wonder if they are buying them because they want to play PCFX, or if they're a collector, or if I don't know if it's common that you have like I don't know a better word for it, like scalpers coming in and basically buying to go basically resell in the U.S. Um,
Well, I know that the the thinking inside of Japan is often,
mhm,
true or not, that it's because the foreigners are coming in and they're big on retro games and they're buying them.
mhm,
And there is some truth to that,
mm.
but if there was any sort of counterexample, PCFX should be it, right?
True,
That's
yeah,
true.
you
Yes.
do need a significant level of Japanese to really appreciate it. So.
Right. So I don't think that's the whole story.
Mm.
I think it's they're getting rare. There's people in Japan who are saying, I never played this, or maybe I want to complete my collection. I don't really know exactly what the thinking is, and
Yeah,
I'm sure everybody has a different motivation, but
yeah.
um, they're um, they're just not there. Or maybe the stores are saying, I don't want to carry this stuff because it's taking too much shelf space and it doesn't move.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That
I
could be as
know
well.
when Vink mentioned it last time, he was on the show before talking about kind of the used game market in Japan and how it's developed, and PCFX included in that. He did mention that Graduation Reel had gotten fairly expensive recently as well. And I know there's a bunch of like different voice actors and things connected to that. I don't actually know anything about that market of like voice actor merch, and like does eventually a voice actor come back in style, and like the merch that got offloaded at some point suddenly goes back up in price as well, as like similar to video games. I don't really know anything about that. So,
Well, that's an interesting question. You probably, if you're following Twitter at least,
mm,
you will have seen that there have been some big name deaths recently,
mm,
right? And so when that happens, you say, "Wow, what did they do? Oh my God, they were in this. I had no idea." So then you see a run on some of their previous works,
I
and
didn't thought about that. It is kind of like a morbid thing to think about, but it would make a lot of sense that
yeah,
after somebody passed, that they would get their stuff might become more desirable at that point.
yeah.
So,
Now I have no idea if that's the case for PCFX stuff,
mhm.
but yeah, it happens.
Yeah, yeah. Were you able to find anything for yourself? Oh no, you have a complete collection, right? I'm trying to
Yeah,
remember.
for PCFX, I've got
Okay.
a complete collection. So it wasn't so much that. It was more I was looking to see
Mhm.
if the people on the Discord would be able to benefit from me letting them know where stuff was. And the truth is, it was pretty dry.
When you went to the smaller towns outside of Tokyo and Akihabara and things like that, did you do any game shopping out there? And did they ever show up there? Or?
And not so much. I mean, I did see in the last time I went before May, I went to a hard off in a small
Mm,
town, and they didn't have any PCFX stuff, but I mean, they had all sorts of vinyl. They had
Yeah.
all sorts of Nintendo and even PC Engine stuff. So it's out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
When I was in Nagoya, I went in was it a Lash and Bang or something like that? I don't remember exactly, but there was a store I went to there, and it was kind of crazy how much the price difference was there versus like anything in Akihabara and like Tokyo and stuff like that. Because that was like back to like, oh, games are like 100 to 200 yen each game. Now it is like, hey, we have like 80 copies of Monster Hunter 4 on the 3DS, which is like one of the most produced games on 3DS.
right,
But it was there at the very least. Versus when you're Akihabara, I feel like everything feels like it's at least 500 yen or up at that point. At
right.
least last time I went, that's how I felt. So
Well, the other thing is you probably should be thinking about who's the purchaser, right?
yeah, yeah.
So probably the main guy who's purchasing is going to be between 35 and mid 40s,
Mm-hmm,
and they're going to be thinking back to their youth.
mm-hmm.
So 20, 30 years is probably about as far as they're going to go back.
Yeah,
So when you're talking about 40-year-old games, there are not a lot of draw for those, but
yeah.
they're the rare ones. They're the ones that are hard to find. So, like for example, Beep in
Mm-hmm.
the underground store in Akihabara, they're big on the computers, and some of the stuff that they have X68000 and so on. It's incredibly expensive, but when it's in good condition, it's incredibly desirable as well.
Yeah. And I think they have like, they do repair and stuff like that as well. So I think they actually like clean stuff up when they get it and kind of get it in working order before
Yeah,
they sell it, kind of
I
thing.
think in order to deal with hardware, you kind of have to do
Yeah.
that in Japan. So those guys, I haven't seen any real evidence of it, but it wouldn't surprise me. Them and Kenchan Kaden no Kenchan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he does some of the same stuff.
Okay.
It's a little tiny store in a radio something building.
Mm.
It's really no bigger than kind of two desks end to end, but the amount of stuff in that shop is immense.
Is it like PC 98 kind of stuff, or is there a particular theme to it, or?
That guy has a lot of Famicom, a lot of modern build hardware for the retro machines,
Mm.
um, like uh, like homebrew kind of games as well. So he's really got a niche in there. He's like his stuff is really cool. I also got a set of replacement gears for the PC Engine CD-ROM from there.
Nice.
Yeah,
Are those like aftermarket made, or were they?
must be,
Yeah,
must be.
yeah. Well, cool. And so when you were in Japan, you also went to a event at one point as well. And I don't actually remember the full context of what this event was. So could you give like a high level overview of what it was?
Yeah, so it was a Hudson event,
Mm-hmm.
kind of Hudson's 50th anniversary reunion. A few people from Hudson were there. I don't remember all of their names, but there was a music guy, an art guy, kind of a programmer,
Mm-hmm.
and in any case, the bunch of them were telling anecdotes about things that happened at Hudson during their stay there. A little bit of history of how Hudson came to being.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wish that my Japanese was better, especially for colloquial stuff, because it was very colloquial. Uh, but the main guy who spoke probably the most was Iwasaki-san, who was the programmer who worked on a bunch of things, including Ys. And he didn't play it up during the event, but I did find out recently that he's making a series of these books, Hudson Densetsu, talking about kind of the chronicling the history of Hudson and how they developed stuff
Mm-hmm.
over the years, and it's really quite interesting. But it's if you don't speak Japanese, you're going to need a lot of help.
Is he producing that on like almost like a independent level, or is he going with a publisher for that, or is Beep
It's
helping with that?
as far as I know, it's completely independent.
Okay.
I heard, although I don't know for sure, but I heard that his wife is the artist drawing all the art.
Hmm.
And in the text inside of it, he's reaching out to his friends to get like the people that he worked with back then to get their histories, their recollections, and he's trying to reconcile this guy's memory against that guy's memory. Let me find some reason why I should believe this guy over that guy. Is there some proof, some document? So he's really being quite thorough about it.
And so I'm assuming it's just like a stage show kind of thing, and there's speakers and things like that. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, it was in a relatively small kind of a bar kind of a place, not really a bar, but they did have drink service and they had food. And yeah, they had the people up on a stage. Maybe, I don't know, about 50 people, something like that, maybe 70.
Cool. And were you able to understand what was being said generally?
On and off.
On and off, yeah.
On and off.
Gotcha. So what was the, I guess maybe like to still talking about the event broadly, like what was kind of like the highlight of that event for you personally?
For me personally, I think it was meeting up with some of the other people like me in the Tokyo area, like JP Wentz and Chris Covell and the other guy who's developing a game. I forgot his name at the moment because I don't usually use the name. He's making a ninja game.
Yes, I would have to look too. Yeah, unfortunately, but yes, no, I know exactly. It's a very impressive looking game. Like the progress on it has been really cool. But maybe we'll put the name up here. Apologies to the
individual. Is that a modern game or is that like a home?
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's for PC Engine.
Okay, PC Engine.
But gotcha. But he's building it and he's showing off little bits and pieces. It looks really good.
Okay, so there's definitely other foreigners there with you, it sounds like, generally.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware from what you've said, PCFX was not a formal part of this event. Is that accurate?
No, they kind of said, that I didn't really deal with that.
Yeah.
I think there was a question in the Q&A section about PCFX, but they kind of said, NEC did what NEC did.
Yeah,
sure.
Which is interesting to... Like, I think the thing that I still trying to figure out is like how much of the direction was Hudson versus NEC. And then, we talked about on one of the previous shows this year, Takashi Meijing, I feel like he had a pretty clear statement on like what his view of what the PCFX was trying to do, or PCFX was trying to do was, in regards to like, what the intention of doing FMV was for and things like that. And so separating it out and saying like NEC's just doing what NEC did feels a little bit more of a step back from that.
Well, I mean, you kind of, it's hard to say how much of this is posturing and how much of this is saying that was a train wreck and I don't want to be known as the guy who said something about it. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
it's really hard to say because a lot of these guys they really truly weren't in that group. They didn't do anything about it. They don't know. They don't have any knowledge.
Yeah.
So understanding who could have knowledge is already difficult.
Yeah, and I mean I don't know for sure, but if you look at like PCF or Hudson's history around the PCFX, they're developing games for a variety of platforms across the board. So it seems very likely a lot of people at the company may have never even touched a PCFX in some way. Because there's only is it 3 games that they did on PCFX, 3 or 4? It's very small numbers still. So
yeah, something like that. It seems like the PCFX came out and they did a couple of early games and then they just sort of went on to different platforms and it became a diffuse thing at that time.
Yeah.
We talked about that a little before. I feel like the relationship between the two companies might have soured a little bit pretty early on in the PCFX life cycle.
That sounds very possible.
Yeah. So you did talk to one fellow. What was his full name again? I have his last name there, but
yeah. So I met a guy on Twitter who was using not but Husey, and I was conversing with him, and I eventually got to see his homepage on Twitter to find out who he is.
Hold up one second. Was he at this event? I may have misunderstood.
No, he wasn't. He was at a different.
I thought these were connected.
He was at a different event on the same day. It was like a PC88 event that he was
Gotcha.
at. But his
Okay.
name is Kotaro Horie. Mr. Horie worked on PCFX game Chip Chan Kick. Now I didn't know that at the time when I was when I was answering his questions about QC and so on. But then I kind of got around to it. And I said, "Oh, what did you work on, and what was that like?" And I mean, he was kind of like, why are you interested? Like,
Yeah.
kind of like, PCFX was PCFX. So then I spoke to Matt about this, and he said, "Oh, I've got a few questions that, if it's possible, can you ask him?"
So we took the approach of making, I think when we ask these questions, we usually want to have like a broader view of the PCFX in general, to some extent, because it's interesting to know, exactly why, or exactly what they were thinking about the console when they're working on and things like that. So our initial question was basically one to kind of just ask about his general impressions of the PCFX. So the question was, other than Chip Chan Kick, what were your impressions of the PCFX and the other titles you may have played using it?
So Mr. Horie told us, when developing the PCFX software, they lent me some samples as development materials. I think they were Battle Heat and Team Innocent. My impression was that the animation videos were played one after another, and I thought the animation video playback was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I don't know, it's really hard, I feel like, for me in hindsight, because I wasn't around when FMV was even really or not really paying attention to the game coverage and when FMV was like really being seriously considered. Um, but the impression I get is that anyone who was seeing it at the time was still really impressed by it, even though in my eyes, FMV has always seemed like this kind of old, outdated thing, and why we try to build a video game around it, right? So,
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about it, at that time when the PCFX came out, you had the Super Famicom, you had the PC Engine, you had the Mega Drive, and only the CD versions of those systems could do any sort of video, and its video was pretty lousy.
and then sometimes there's like within little frames and things like that as well. So,
Right. And I mean, they could do really well on cutscenes, but that wasn't video so much as it was an animation driven by a program.
yeah.
Right. I remember seeing, what was it, the Sherlock Holmes detective video, FMV based game on the Sega CD at the time, and thinking that it was pretty impressive, right? And if you look at it now, like it looks horrible. Like it's so grainy. The color, there's so few colors. It's in such a small window.
Exactly. So you can
Yeah.
imagine how impressive that must have been to see the PCFX doing full screen and everything.
All right. So the next question we asked is, as a developer, what was your impression of the advantages and disadvantages of the PCFX hardware?
All right, and Horie responded, the programming of Chip Chan Kick was divided between two programmers. As a sub-programmer, I was in charge of creating tools such as image, SP, and BG. Do you know what that means, David? SP and BG?
Sprites and background.
Okay, gotcha. Display, sound, PCM playback control, character collision editor, and map editor. I was not in charge of the FX's distinctive features such as controlling the motion JPEG decoder, HUC6271. I don't know if there's a more glamorous way to say that. In terms of my scope of work, having two HUC6270s and being like a larger version of the PC Engine could be considered an advantage. But simply put, it was a long time ago, and I don't remember at all how we controlled the two of them. But I think there were some inconveniences as well. I remember enjoying using the King chip, and it was fun to control because various things can be done with raster interrupts. Now, there's a lot of chips in that response, David. I was curious if I don't really have context for what these chips are. So if you want to say something more greater about this,
Yeah, sure,
you can.
sure.
But I'm also curious, like, what are these chips and like, what does it mean to like specify these, I guess?
Okay, so the PCFX starts out, if you think about the video and the sound, it starts out being very similar to a souped up PC Engine. Right? Actually, a PC Engine has one of the 6270 chips, which they call 7-Up.
Okay.
Super Graphics has two of those. PCFX also has 2 of those, but it has double the memory of the super-graphx. So that's what he's talking about there with the sprites and the background. So I mean, this is a super PC engine from a video point of view. Plus,
it's like a super graphics.
That's right. Plus, it's got very similar programmable sound generator. Plus, it's got very similar ADPCM, but it's got 2 channels and it does faster playback. So if you're familiar with the PC engine, it should be quite familiar to work on the PCFX. In addition to all of that, the King chip adds multiple other backgrounds. It adds a little bit of rotation and scaling, and a few other effects that you can take advantage of. And then the JPEG decoder, the 6271, that's about the motion video, full motion video. So the ChipChan Kick, it only uses the full motion video in the interstitial cinemas, right?
I think it's actually maybe only the intro, and I don't know if there's maybe like an outro video, because the in-betweens, I believe, are like that sprite-based videos. I was wondering, David, if maybe you had any sort of clarification, because it seems like he's implying that he did some tool writing, which...
Right.
Yeah, I would interpret that to be, tools that maybe then the main programmer could use, and other people like artists and things like that, in order to, it seems like some image display, maybe work with the sprites or
I would assume something similar.
The collision editor, okay. He also, though, did mention, some of these chips directly and things like that. Do you think he was maybe focused strictly on the tools, or also was doing, routines that were running during actual gameplay and things like that?
So he did mention a little bit more detail about what he did. So, for example, you got a high score menu. You have little navigation menus throughout the game. So he did those.
Okay.
Backgrounds during the play.
Oh, nice.
He did those. So it's a bunch of stuff that makes the game better, but isn't the core of the game. That's what he means by the sub-programmer.
Gotcha.
So one of the things that he mentioned, and I did want to call attention to this, he talked about raster interrupts.
Yeah.
So what that is, I mean, the CRT draws a screen like this, just line after line. And beginning with, even I think the Famicom also did this, is you could have an interrupt happen so that you do something at this line. Maybe you change the palette, so the top half of the screen is one color, the bottom half of the screen is a different color. Something like that. On the PC Engine, it was fast enough that you could kind of make these weird wavy Scooby-Doo, doodly-doo, doodly-doo kind of graphics, right? On the PCFX, what he showed me, and I can give you a pointer into a YouTube video that shows what this is about. There is a point where he's actually changing the scaling of a line and the position of the line so that it looks like it's parallax, right? And it's kind of moving like this, kind of a floor, as though the front half of it at the bottom of the screen is moving more quickly than the back half, which is receding off into the distance, because he's changing that multiplier each line.
So basically, and I'm sorry, like just trying to simplify this even more, is it basically just gives them more like dynamic control of like how the sprites are displayed on screen, essentially, right?
It's in the background, not the sprites, but
yeah,
it's still a lot of work.
Yeah,
it's still really quite interesting how he did that. Yeah, I think in the early stages you don't really see any of the effects that I'm talking about. It's really toward the end. There's some space stages where things in the background are moving like this, and
I feel like the final boss has like some of this.
That is the final level. Yeah. There's like some kind of space background with like a bunch of line or colored lines, like kind of going back and forth and applying different effects.
That's definitely done with raster effects.
Okay, cool. I'll have to see if I have some footage of that, because I could definitely just like put that on screen to make that more clear of what exactly is happening there. So that makes sense. That would be it. So I was curious. So the 627 or 270. How did you refer to it again? The 6270. Is that how you say the name?
Yeah, the 6270s. So they
6270.
had
Okay.
a code name for it called 7 Up. And there's a Iwasaki-san. He wrote, why did we call it 7 Up? And it's because it deals with sprites.
Oh,
Yeah,
funny.
it's that reason.
The question I was going to ask. So that chip is the PC Engine chip as well, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So the King and the 6271, those are unique to PCFX, or
That's correct.
Okay, gotcha. So those are the two chips unique then. All right, and those weren't used in SuperGraphics or anything like that as well, right?
That's correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, SuperGraphics was just a PC Engine with a couple of extra things that they already had.
Yeah, so the next thing we asked was just what past experience was most useful in developing PCFX.
And Horie said, experience developing software in assembly language. At that time, I had little experience as a programmer, and this was the only experience I had. Which I had the question with because I don't know a lot about programming languages and things like that. I know there are a bunch of different ones, but I know older consoles, typically you would program basically, the way I always heard it referred to is like at the metal, essentially, which I mean, I think you're directly programming the chip rather than like through an interface between the chip and the game.
So I think starting when I started, this, they already had BASIC on computers.
Yeah.
And that's how most people learned first, was they'd learn BASIC, but BASIC was really good for helping you understand the concepts, but it was slow.
Yeah.
So very quickly people would say, how can I make this faster? And there would be the machine language point, which assembly language is the human readable form of machine language, because machine language is just going to be a bunch of binary hex digits, right? Assembly language is going to be, load B from H, which still doesn't mean anything to you, I'm sure, but it's register B is going to now get the value from register H, which are kind of moving a variable around, right?
It's giving you, even though it's like, jargon, it is telling you kind of key things about different, I assume, like programming points or things like that, and how these things are interacting with each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but the key here is that every processor has a different assembly language because they have a different instruction set.
Yeah.
So I understand that he worked on X68000 before this, so that's a different processor. So it didn't translate directly, whatever experience he had before.
Gotcha.
One thing I was going to mention is that I would assume that having that assembly experience was probably particularly attractive for working on console games. But I don't know, like, would you say like you're going to be maybe focusing on assembly more when you're developing for a console versus like a PC architecture, or is it? Do you think that it makes much difference?
Well, I mean, if you think about what is a console is kind of like a few years later than a machine, at least back in than a PC, at least back then. So in order to get the most out of it, you kind of have to directly access the input output ports.
Sure.
So for example, on the video, you're going to have to write directly to the video memory rather than you're going to have some operating system doing stuff for you, right? So maybe what he means by this is I was fully used to working on a low level. I know how computers work. I know that I have to hit this memory location in order for something to happen. Because if you're working in business software, it's not like that at all.
Yeah. So is working in assembly the standard practice for PCFX games, as far as we can tell, if either of you know, or was there some other kind of type of code that people could make games with?
By then, my expectation is that they already had the C compiler, so they had something. Whether it was a good compiler or not, they didn't have to program directly in assembler. They could kind of do it a little bit easier than that with a slightly higher level language.
Gotcha. And in a C compiler, would that be system specific, or like how that works, or?
Well, C is kind of a standard language, and the compiler translates the C code into whatever the backend is needed for that computer.
Gotcha. So it'd be specific to the PCFX, whatever that compiler being used would
Yeah,
be.
that's right.
Yeah, gotcha. What made Cybertech Custom develop games for the PCFX?
So Mr. Horie says, up until that point, Custom had been developing PC games, but I think they wanted to develop consumer games, and I think they may have also received an offer from NEC Home Entertainment.
One thing I haven't looked too much into is like what NEC is like the main publisher for most games on PCFX, so I'm kind of curious like what that relationship looked like in terms of like how much were they reaching out to developers and how were they getting in contact with them through that. Because one thing that I noticed with Hunex is that there is a guy at NEC who has like played a big role, it seems like, on a lot of the games that they have made, as like, and he would play like the director role in like multiple games, even though he was at NEC instead. So I'm not sure with every one of those publishing jobs, like I'm curious like how direct NEC was related to those. And in case of or Cybertech, like how did that initial connection happen, and what role would NEC play in like actually making the game? Is something I haven't really thought about.
So here's how I interpret this: is NEC Home Electronics was trying to get developers to work on the PCFX. So and then the positioning of the machine, it looks like a PC. It's aimed at a higher age audience than any other console. So it looks like they're trying to get people who have written stuff for computers, because those are more complicated games, those are more involved games, more time-consuming games, and you could see that a lot of things were moved from PC98 or X68000 and ended up on the PCFX. So I think there was an outreach related to that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Cybertech Custom also like definitely has that anime aesthetic. I think in their previous games and stuff. So I could see that being a good fit where NEC is kind of, they're looking for developers, and Cybertech Custom is also maybe interested in being able to open up, the opportunity to develop for consoles as opposed to just on PC. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the PCFX library, Dragon Knight 4, Durlangrisser, like all of these games were kind of started out as PC games and then turned into console games.
Another point that I wanted to make about the PCFX and Mr. Horie too, I think, is that I remember in doing research on the system starting to get the impression that perhaps it was a system where companies, whether it's NEC or just the developers, were kind of giving the younger people a chance to, just do what they wanted to have opportunities on the system. I remember we were talking about the interview with Yoshi P, where he attended the Hudson school and then, said that he wanted to do scenario writing and things like that. And then he was able to work on, what is it, Tengai Makyo Namida, which of course didn't end up coming out on the PCFX, but it sort of seems like, a young developer who didn't really have, a lot of development work, but had done, assembly programming for the X68000, and, maybe Cybertech Custom, who had, I don't know how many games they had under their belt at the time. It seems like I sort of get that impression that it was an interesting opportunity for various people to just sort of, to develop games on an interesting platform.
Anything you want to add about Horie?
Well, I mean, I saw some of the stuff that he's working on today. Most of it is kind of hobby for his own purposes stuff. He was making a a little converter on a microcontroller to take the X68000. They made a mini version of it,
Yeah.
and it takes USB controllers. But apparently they don't have a spinner. But somebody else brought out a spinner, but it doesn't work. So he had to convert the USB signals from the spinner's version to what the X68000 accepts as a mouse, right? So it was interesting. That was very interesting.
When you say spinner, do you mean almost like a dial that you kind of turn on a? I think of like
Yeah,
Arkanoid
exactly.
kind
A
of thing. Yeah.
free spinning, like it turns around something that you would see on like Tempest or
Okay.
Arkanoid.
Mm-hmm. Arkanoid's the one I'm familiar with for sure
Yeah,
on that
yeah,
one.
yeah.
So okay. It's cool. Yeah, the little X68000 thing, I was following that when that was getting released, and it was interesting that they really seemed to push for like getting people involved in developing for it. Um, they had like a various little Kickstarter project, and they had like a developer version of the console, even though it was a little tiny one. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think what happened there was they came out with a unit because they thought, well, we'll just make a unit and everybody will love it.
Mhm.
But the people who saw it probably said, well, it's missing this, it's not doing that properly, and they said, oh my, oh, this is a very particular public,
Audience.
so let's get their input.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that system like straight up has like the like operating system and everything on it as well, so you can use it as like an old school PC as in addition to just playing
Yeah,
games on it and things like that.
yeah,
So
it looks like a really interesting little console, and I don't know how many of the old games will play on it. Because as I understand it, a lot of the X68000 stuff was only on floppy and had like custom protection. Yeah.
interesting. Is it? I guess like with when I think of like PCFX, like the copy protection is non-existent, right? You just burn a disk and throw it on there. But yeah, on PC, disks and the ability to copy and stuff was
Well,
very easy to do, and having to prevent that.
yeah, a
Yeah.
PC was built in to read and to write. I
Yeah.
mean, a CD back in '94, you could expect that nobody could actually copy that. I think I saw the first CD burner that I ever saw in '97, and that was at a company I was working for, not home use.
Yeah. Wasn't immediately available to have a CD burner in your home until closer to the 2000s.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe one thing I was thinking about when we were talking about the X68000 stuff, whether it's because they intended to get there or not, I do think it's kind of cool that they're like encouraging a hobbyist attitude towards the X68000, the mini version of it, and being like, hey, make some stuff for this. I think that's like pretty cool. So in saying that, David, you've been working on some stuff for the PCFX. I want to just kind of get let you go through the things you've been working on, and then I think
Okay.
we will just kind of chime in as it makes sense, because I think you'll know best what most of these things are and what's relevant and how to
Okay.
describe them. So
Probably the first thing was as I was making all of this stuff for PC Engine and PCFX, it was just a big long set of kind of unstructured repositories in GitHub. And if you knew me, you knew that I made stuff, but if you don't know me, you don't know where to look. And I had I had seen this on the Mister community, is they created this identity, Mr. Devel. It's called an organization, a GitHub organization, and it contains all of the repositories that are related to Mister. And I thought, you know what? I think that's a great idea to do for PC Engine development and for PCFX development. So I ended up creating those, and I transferred over a lot, but maybe not all, a lot of my relevant work into there. And there's two reasons for that. The first one was because I don't want to be the only guy making stuff, and I want other people to contribute into those two repository, the organizations, and I want them to feel comfortable doing so, and I want the end users to know that if they go here, this is kind of the best place to go looking for stuff. So that's, we put Mednafen in there. I'm not the only developer on that. We put Mednafen in there. We put, I've got a Hugh C is in there, and some other stuff for the PC Engine. I started transferring over a bunch of information for PCFX. We've got a copy of the FX uploader in there. I don't have the compiler and some of the other tools in there just yet. But so anyway, as I say, one of the reasons is so that people can go there one-stop shop. And the other reason is actually a little bit more morbid. I spoke a little earlier about some of the voice actors and so on passing away. And our last episode that we did together, we had an in memoriam of B.T. Garner. So I mean, we're mortals, right? So I don't want my stuff to get stranded because nobody has access to it if I pass away. So if it's an organization, a bunch of different people have access to it, can control those repositories, can kind of keep them up to date in the absence of any one of those members. So that's the thinking behind it.
There was kind of the feeling for a long time, I think, like everything you put on the internet is kind of forever, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of times now we're seeing a lot of sites getting taken down, whether because they're old or for legal reasons and things like that.
Yeah.
Is GitHub a place that's like pretty protected from that kind of thing, where there wouldn't really be a lot of risk of this stuff kind of like disappearing overnight kind of thing? Or
So I got two answers to that.
okay.
The first one is, for now it is.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're going to do in the future. But the second answer is any repository that's up there can be cloned down to your machine with one command. So you'll have a live copy of it, right? So if the original repository gets taken away for whatever reason, you can have that copy as well.
Gotcha.
So there's some power in that.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I think you said it earlier, and just to clarify, you said Hugh C. When you reference Hugh C, what are you referencing when you say that? Like, okay. I know Hugh C is like a part of the chip name, so I don't know if it's just like another name for the chip.
So that's a C compiler that people can use to develop games for the PC Engine.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, and that the original version of that was put together by David Michel and Zeograd and myself around 1999 to 2000. And it kind of fell into disuse between the early 2000s and about 4 or 5 years ago. And I know that there's been some activity. I'm not directly involved in that activity. I know there's a few people. Cheeky Bug is probably the most active right now.
And that's PC Engine specific. Is there a version of that for PCFX, or is that what you're working towards right now, trying to be able to do something like that?
There is. So when I say Hugh C, it's a C compiler and a bunch of libraries to access and make good use of the hardware. So what does exist for the PCFX right now is GCC, which is a very common GNU C compiler. So that's out there, and that works for the PCFX. There's a set of libraries to try to make use of the hardware, and that's it was a really good start, but it wasn't really good enough to be used for writing games. And I started taking that. It was called Liberis, and it was written by a guy named Alex Marshall about 12, 13 years ago. So I think it's a really good start at a library in that it has the structure of being able to say, well, here's how you write a library. Here's how you write some assembler, and here's how you access the hardware. But in terms of structure for some guy who's writing a game, it's not at that point.
Yeah. And are you largely working on the PCFX stuff on your own, or is that like a group effort for the PCFX as well?
Well, on and off.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the software, I was working with Enthusi on getting the FX uploader done. and then he's off doing some Virtual Boy stuff right now. I started working on Liberis. I mean, Cheeky Bug did the compiler. Great job. Liberis, I even got Liberis to compile and work and the examples to go, but I think he reached his limit at that point. So I'm rewriting Liberis. I'm going to call it libpcfx. I've got some Japanese documentation that I'm ever so slowly translating into English. And once I've got a first version of that library, I'm going to have a bunch of examples out there, and hopefully at that point I can get some more involvement from other people. Right now it's a little too delicate to share the responsibility, but once it's set in stone.
Gotcha. The
What?
documentation you're. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say what kind of functions are going to be in a library like that.
Okay, well, the very basic thing is, how do you access it? How do you initialize it? How do you send memory to it? Right? How do you create a character set? Right? I want to print something on the screen. How do you print the thing on the screen? So that's at the basic level. Then there's going to be some some more advanced things, like, okay, the raster effects that we were talking about earlier. How do you set a raster effect so that maybe you've got a scrolling screen, but the top is score, and you don't want the score to scroll, you just want the rest of the screen to scroll. How do you do that? So that's another thing. And I think I want to add a bunch of other effects, some sort of screen wash or fade or transition effects that go from one screen to another. I really liked those action games in the arcades in the 80s. And they would have these really cool, scroll off the screen this way, okay, split into two, this kind of thing. And those, I think, are really good example programs because they're quite simple. They're not a game. You're not writing this for 6 months. You're just going to write this little thing. Somebody else can take it, make it a little bit more complicated, run with it, right?
You mentioned you were looking at some Japanese documentation earlier. What are those? Were those like official documents from back in the day, or is this stuff that people have posted up later on the internet, or what exactly were
Yeah,
the?
it's kind of half and half. So you're familiar with the PCFXGA. There was a development kit that was mostly sold separately called GMaker. And that included the Hudson compiler, and it included a bunch of documentation, and it included some example programs. So I'm taking the documentation and I'm interpreting it, and I'm understanding the actual hardware so that the libraries can be written. I don't think I can release the translation because it's based on the original documentation. But this is the kind of stuff that, because it's a series of facts, if it's substantially reworded, then that would be okay. But I don't have time for that at the moment. So we'll see what is possible.
I believe are some hardware differences between the GA and the base PCFX. Are there any things in the documents that don't really apply to the PCFX directly that you have to kind of work around, or is it close enough it doesn't really matter?
It's really close. I think the only two things that are different are the 3D chip, and those, like, that's a separate set of documentation, and I'm not going to worry about that at first, right? I'm going to make this program to target to the PCFX first and foremost. I don't really have a lot of interest in the 3D chip, but maybe I will by the time I get there. I don't know. The other thing that's different is the way that backup memory is managed, and they say you should be using the ROM routine in the BIOS to read and write the memory, because on the regular PCFX it's internal memory, but on the PC FXGA it's writing to the PC, and the PC is keeping a local file. So you don't have direct access to that. It's something that's a little different.
Gotcha. And when you're going through these documents and things like that, it sounds like that's helping you do the work you have right now. What are the places do you think are the biggest kind of like blind spot? I mean, there might be a lot, I don't know, but blind spots for you right now in terms of the work you're doing at the moment?
Well, as I say, a lot of this is PC Engine like. So those parts are really quite straightforward. So I've actually rewritten a good part of Liberis to be useful. And, this is a good point. In order to be sure that it was a usable library, I decided I'm going to take a PC Engine game that I wrote many years ago, and I'm going to see how easy it is to get running on this library. So the game Blocks, which is really a Tetris clone. There's no sound or anything, but I said, okay, well let's see what it takes. How difficult is it? Where do I need to add comments? What is excess? What is not working at all? And get those fixes in. So that's really exercising mostly the controller and the video chip. I haven't quite got to the sound chip yet, but there will be other things that I write to make sure that those get exercised.
Um, Without getting like too terribly technical about it, when you're porting this over, I've never seen the original block, so I have no idea how close it is to that original version on the PC Engine, if it is identical or, if there's music or sound or anything like that.
Yeah, there's no sound, and it's intended to be
a demo.
as close as possible. Yeah. Identical, yeah.
Yeah. And how was it easier or harder than you expected to do that process for you for PC Engine to PCFX?
Well, originally I wrote the PC Engine one in assembler, and I wrote the PCFX one in C. It wasn't harder, although understanding some pieces of the libraries, the Liberis, because it was a bunch of code with no comments. So just understanding, is this a bug or did he intend to do it this way? I have no idea, but it's not working the way I expect it to. This type of thing, right?
Gotcha. One thing that came up a long time ago when I was looking into like Mr. stuff was the idea of like, I don't remember the language used for it, so apologize if this sounds crazy without me knowing the actual terms, but it's like almost like scraping the chips to understand how they work. Like I think laying out the transistors and how those are laid out. I could be wrong.
So
but
that's going to an extreme. So they refer to that as decapping.
Gotcha.
And up to a certain year or so, you can actually take the package off and take a look at the chip inside, and with a microscope and see the actual circuits and what are they doing. And if you know how these circuits have been built, the master cells, right, then you can kind of infer, okay, what was the logic in use here and what is it actually doing? What is the logic actually doing? But this only works up to a certain year, because after that point, you have too many layers and you can only see like 2 layers deep.
Gotcha. And that be after PCFX or before, like would PCFX be valid for something like that?
I think early 90s is kind of the limit of where we're at right now.
Gotcha. Cool. And then so with Block specifically, I guess, was there anything in that process that you felt like you learned about, bringing stuff over? Was there something that you think was like particularly, did you learn anything more than what you were expecting to learn, maybe is the question?
No, I think what I was expecting to learn was, okay, what in the library is useful, what needs to be rewritten, and what can be thrown out because it doesn't make sense.
Gotcha. Okay. And how, I know this is like a really weird question to ask, is like asking like, what is a video game release date like 2 years out from its actual release? But how far along do you feel like you are in this process of creating a tool set that I think, to my understanding, ideally is about giving people tools to kind of make their own games in a more accessible way, right? Like how far along do you feel like in that process? And how do you feel it's going as well?
So it's difficult to say because I have a stack of projects like this, and that one isn't always on the top.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's okay. Take some documents, translate a little bit. What do I understand? What can I turn into the library? How can I actually test this? Am I going to test it on Mednafen? Okay, great. But is that actually how it works? So one of the things that I've also built, and I think I talked about this the last time that I was aiming toward it. So you recall that I had this little guy for uploading programs to the PCFX through the controller port.
Yeah.
That helped me understand what is the pinout in the BMP card, and that's how I got the BMP units, right? And then I recently came up with a dev cart. This is a prototype that can allow me to send stuff into the BMP port, and it'll automatically boot. It's much faster than the other one. You don't have to burn a CDR. So this is going to help me clarify: do I actually understand how that piece of hardware is working? If so, then the machine will work, and if Mednafen is a good match for it, then they'll both work. So that's another piece that I'm currently working on. I said this is a prototype. This has, it's no case. It's got these standoffs. This thing here is a microcontroller board that I get from somewhere else. This is not something that I can just give to somebody, right? So I want to make it look a lot more like this, with a case, and the USB port will be here, and it'll be
similar to the non-volatile memory card thing. That's what.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which I did buy one recently, and I do appreciate that, because I was trying to like do some stuff with First Kiss Story, and funnily enough, I don't know for sure. I got a cutscene at the start when you boot the game up, where it's like two of the girls like in their room, and they're like talking about the fact you can't save any data, and one of the girls starts troubleshooting why you can't save the data. And she's
hysterical.
like, "Oh, you gotta go delete stuff in the data base you have, or whatever, or in the internal memory." And it says, "Well, for now, we'll just send you the title screen, or to the not the title screen, the BIOS screen," and then they kick you out of the game.
Oh, really? Wow, that's pretty cool. I had no idea.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting, because I was booting it up, testing it for Portland Retro Game Expo, and I was like, "What is happening? Why do I have a cutscene where I just like boot the game up?" So that I was able to use that and transfer that data over, so I could actually save a new First Kiss Story save file. So, but yeah. So this card, like, I think what I'm following with you is that basically beforehand you had the controller port way to kind of like inject programs onto the PCFX, or run programs, and in this case it'll be through the NVBMP. And I guess maybe one question I have, and maybe, sorry if you already answered this and I missed it, but what are the key benefits of doing that through the memory port versus the controller port?
So one benefit is you don't need a boot disk. Right.
Yeah, the boot disk thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. If you and in that sense, if you've got a PCFX that's not working, maybe there could be some kind of diagnostic program downloaded to it.
Gotcha.
That helps understand. The other thing is it's much faster to download. It's maybe 10 times faster to download, and you just turn on the machine and it boots right into it.
Gotcha.
If you're iterating a program, I can see that being like a big win.
Oh yeah. And actually that's another thing that I didn't do this. This was Enthusi did this, but I'm going to take it one step further. I have, one second here. Here is a PCFX mainboard. Okay, so this guy right here is the boot ROM. And when you turn on the PCFX, it spends about 10 seconds going, "Hi, I'm a PCFX, blah, blah."
Yeah.
And you don't really want to do that when you're programming. When you say, "Oh, does it work this time? Does it not work this time?" You don't want to wait that 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So Enthusi found a section in there where it's basically showing up the motion JPEG, and it's playing the sound, and he was able to cut it out. So you save about 10 seconds, it boots right to the screen. One of the boards that I'm going to make is going to be to kind of, you remove this, and then you put one of those little kind of a flexible board in there, and you'll be able to put this back on top with another ROM in here, so you can have an alternate. And hopefully we can come up with different ways of patched ROMs that do different things.
So is that like kind of like injecting code before it even boots up, basically, essentially, or modifying the code?
Yeah, well, it'll be a switchable ROM. You can either have the original or you can have the patched version. So you can patch it on MedNaf and today, but you can't run it on the original hardware. So people often, they say, "Oh my gosh, I need to do something in the memory manager, but I can't read it."
Yeah.
So that's hopefully going to be one of the possible applications, is to get a translated version of some of the BIOS.
Cool. And to be clear, the dev card in its name, mostly for people who are going to be developing for the system. A normal user who's just there to play games probably would never touch this thing, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So that's going to help with the development of the libraries, with the understanding of the hardware. And all of this has a big, long end game of, one day we want to make a Mr. Core, or we want to have other ways of playing our games, just in case this wonderful machine is no longer around. But we also want to be able to write new stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
With the Mr. Core specifically, I know some other consoles around this time have some struggles on the Mr. and people have gotten around those. I think the Saturn and the 64, there's been a lot of like work to kind of make it work, even if it doesn't necessarily directly replicate the hardware that older systems kind of approach with that. Does the PCFX have any potential problems with something like that, do you see, or not really because it's so close to the PC Engine or something?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
It might. So PC Engine, it really had main memory and video memory, and that's fine. Like, there was enough memory on the Mister between the DDR and the internal memory and chip. No big deal. But as you say, as soon as you get to like a Saturn or a Nintendo, where you need faster access, you need multiple different devices that you're communicating with at the same time, that gets really tricky. So whereas at this point I feel, yeah, maybe I could come up with something as complex as a PC Engine now. PCFX is still beyond my capability, right? But as I find out, like, one of the things is I want to find out all of the different pieces of the PCFX and make it in a readable way, so that somebody who does have those capabilities can access it and build it, or work with me and I can find out what's missing, that type of thing.
But at this point, you think focusing on the Mister and what the PCFX can do on the Mister is the best use of anybody's time, probably. It sounds like
I think it'll, if you can fit the Saturn and the PSX and the Nintendo 64, it can be fit. Now, does that mean I can fit it in there? Probably not.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But somebody like a Robert Pipe or a SRG 320 or FPGA Zumspass, those guys, they could do it.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, how hard it is to, like, what gets their attention, right? Not that I'm saying that we need to, but I was like, what makes them decide which projects they work on? And like, is PCFX even possible for somebody of that technical level to eventually look at?
I think first and foremost, they have to like the machine.
Yeah.
And then they have to, have information available. Because if you don't have the information available, it's like, I could be the guy who spends a year discovering this information, but if I'm that guy, then I'm not building a core.
Yeah. Gotcha. And do you think any role of like Mednafen being in like a pretty, as far as I can tell, every time I've used Mednafen, it seems to run pretty well overall. Do you think there is any like disincentive if it has a software emulator that's kind of already running fine, or does that not really matter, do you think?
To people writing a core,
For
I don't,
Mister, yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily a disincentive.
Gotcha.
Like there's enough things that are questionable about how Mednafen works. Like I've already fixed how the controllers work and a couple of other bugs. It's clearly something that needs to be validated against real hardware.
Have you found any games when you use Mednafen? If it's, I mean, maybe you don't even play games. Maybe we're just talking about the straight up like programming part of it. Not that you don't play games, but I'm realizing in saying this that like when you say there's issues, it might not even be that you're noticing them while playing a game as much as it is just when you're doing testing and things like that, something shows up, right?
Yeah, it's when I'm doing testing.
Gotcha.
I haven't seen any issues in specific games. I haven't heard about issues in specific games for the PCFX core, but I do know that there are some things that the CPU is running faster than it should.
Yeah.
It's not stopping for video memory. So none of this, like if there was an issue, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. One thing I did notice actually, the Anarch demo, the one that Sauce in the
Right.
community made, I ran that on Mendafen and it runs probably like 2 to 3 times faster on Mendafen than it does on actual
Sure.
PCFX.
Sure.
So I was like, oh, this plays completely differently here.
Yeah, and that's another reason why the dev card is important. If you're going to
Yeah.
run something like that on real hardware, you want to see first and foremost how does it really run on real hardware, and secondly, okay, if Mednafen has got it all wrong, how do we fix it? But let me just touch on a couple more things. So inside the GitHub, the organization, probably the biggest repository that's going to be useful to people is the PCFX info repository. It's just a bunch of information about the hardware, trying to gather everything. One of the most recent additions to that is Regis. Regis Kalis is his name on the Discord, but he's been mapping out the daughter board schematic. Right, so we got all the parts on this. This daughter board effectively is playing CDs. This is the CD controller.
Gotcha.
So he's mapped that out. One of the reasons for that is these potentiometers here, these little trim pots that we use to adjust the laser and so on. We're trying to get a better sense of, we know that if you touch the middle one and adjust it ever so slightly, you can improve its ability to read in the general sense. But what if they're all randomized? How do you maybe you need an oscilloscope, but how do you actually bring them back to normal?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of tuning and tune-ups and fixes that we want to be able to enable. And then also, another thing that I've worked on is there is I don't have it right here, but a little board that I've made to go in between these two boards. So I've got my logic analyzer to watch the data exchange, and this is effectively SCSI, so Small Computer Systems Interface, SCSI. So this is a pretty popular interface in the 80s and early 90s. And that's what they're using for the CD.
Okay,
Now,
this is basically the same interface where, like, if you had hooked this up to the PC98, the PC98 would also be able to read the CD-ROM.
Yeah. So as you know, the PCFX also has an FX SCSI attachment that plugs in the back where it can be used as a SCSI device. So somehow that pack is communicating and accessing the CD through those commands. The PC98 also uses its own SCSI set. Interestingly, the PC Engine also uses SCSI. So what Regis is currently working on is he made, separate from Mister, he made a PC, an FPGA implementation of the PC Engine, and all the way up to the CD-ROM. But now he says, okay, well, what if I was able to replace the CD-ROM unit with a piece of hardware? Rather than, I mean, there are a few different hardwares out there already, but they work at a kind of a different level. They don't work right at the SCSI. They're hearing the requests from the main unit, so they fit on the back, like the Terra Onions.
Terra,
yeah. Terra Onions SHD S3, right? So that acts as
I don't know what that is. The Terra Onion SHD.
It's basically, so it's like, it's like an ODE. Like basically, you.
That's right.
Access your stuff through a memory card or something, and you're basically bypassing the CD-ROM entirely.
Okay, so it's for, in the case of like someone playing games, they could load games directly off of that, the Terra Onion thing, right?
Yeah, it all happens through an external port.
Okay,
right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so what Regis is trying to do right now is just replace the little CD-ROM unit. So you've got your PC Engine plugged into an IFU30 briefcase holder, right? But instead of the little CD-ROM drive, you've got a different square occupying that place that acts the same. So that's one of the. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of work still to be done in that. But if it's possible with the PC Engine, maybe it's possible with PCFX.
Gotcha. And just to make sure I'm clear on this, because I don't want to be misunderstanding. So you're saying with this process, there's a potential that we could have like an ODE type solution for PCFX through this research?
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay.
That's just want to make sure. That's one possible end game. I mean, it's still quite a long ways off.
Yeah.
I'm taking a look at it, and for example, PC Engine has maybe a half dozen different commands that are used in the SCSI.
Mm-hmm.
I take a look at the PCFX instructions, and it's got like 30.
Gotcha.
Right, so it's significantly more complex. It's significantly more, like, there's a lot of research that goes, but it's really interesting.
Yeah. Is there any other benefit that SCSI slot could have beyond just, I feel like I usually focus a little bit more on like, hey, if somebody wants to play games, what's the benefit to them? But other like development benefits to having, access to that slot in terms of, some of the boards you've made already through like the memory and like the controller, does that give you access to anything that you wouldn't have before? Potentially. I know you don't know about it that much. So.
I mean, that's it's interesting because it does open a new world of possibilities. Now, I'm not really sure on the details of this, but when I was poking around in the FX ROM, I saw that when you're copying backup files from the internal to the card, there's apparently an option in there to back them up to a floppy.
Maybe we may have talked about this on the Discord, and I need to go back and look. I feel like there was an option on the GA to be able to save data to a floppy disk,
right?
Potentially.
Well, I think on the GA, it normally saves it on a file on the host computer. But very clearly in the PCFX, it says save it to a floppy.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe they were planning some kind of a floppy extension hardware. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to have some other thing that you can connect to the machine along that same bus, either for development possibilities or even as an extension to the unit for some reason, right?
Gotcha.
I remember there was a similar attachment for, I want to say, the PlayStation, maybe.
Oh yeah.
And you almost wouldn't think it would be all that useful, but one, floppies are cheaper than memory cards, were at the time, and
Yeah.
two, like it also externalized the saves, so you could like transfer them to a PC, share them on a PC, and things like that.
Yeah. Nintendo 64 dived into it a little bit as well with the 64DD that
Oh
has like a
yeah.
floppy disk on the front, but that was more of games on the actual floppy disks in that case. I don't know if they're technically, I think they're floppy disks, but the casing on them is like specific for the 64, so it only fits in there, I believe, rather than like a generic floppy disk kind of thing. So
But
The one
it
I was
is kind
talking about was definitely a third party,
yeah,
okay.
unofficial. Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing about SCSI is most of the units that were available in the 80s and 90s were either mass storage, like a hard disk or CD-ROM,
Mm,
or they might have been like a scanner or a plotter or something like that. So it was, other than storage, I'm not sure that there's a lot of use for it.
yeah.
But it would be kind of interesting to have maybe more than one device.
Yeah. So I know initially when we were talking about this, we were talking about the potential of this being like an ODE solution. One thing that did get talked about in the Discord a little bit, and I think we talked about it on the podcast before, is there was a previous ODE device that got kind of promised for the PCFX. I don't know if promise is the right
Yeah.
word to use. Um,
Well, I mean, it was open for pre-orders.
yeah, okay, you
Yeah.
could pre-order it. That's right, I remember now. So promised is maybe, if anything, a light word to use in that case. But it sounds like I haven't been keeping up with it since personally I never pre-ordered one. But it sounds like the situation that has updated, and I just want to kind of get your guys' thoughts and feelings on that.
Yeah.
So
So you're talking about Fixel,
yeah,
and I mean, he said that he had built this and he had written the menu, and he wanted me to help
yeah,
test, and I was up for that. I never did hear back from him on that.
mhm,
I'm still open to help him on that. I mean, if he's truly at an advanced stage of development, that's wonderful. But apparently he befell a bunch of really bad luck type of items befell him, and
yeah,
he's had to kind of shelve it. He tried to do a lot of different ODEs at the same time as well, which I'm sure complicated matters significantly.
yeah. And one thing I do want to emphasize, especially with like life stuff, like all this is like very hard work in general, right? And just because if it doesn't get delivered, that doesn't necessarily mean like ill intent was there, right? It was sometimes things just kind of fall off, and everyone's going to
Yeah,
deal with that differently. And yeah, so I just want
Yeah,
to put that out there that
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
not claiming anything like negative about it per se.
Well,
So
and all along, I've always been open to help
mm,
whoever, right? So I think my first one that I was helping turbo-graphx, I was doing testing and making sure that things were done correctly, and then um, I got into Mister, and then I was in communication with NeoDev, who does some of the stuff with Terra Onion to fix one or two bugs there. So I just want everybody to have working stuff.
mm,
Um, and I mean, I'm agnostic on what's the best,
yeah,
but core to all of that is getting the information to be correct in the first place.
yeah.
How does it really work?
I don't know if this is something you could share, so feel free to deflect from this entirely. But his implementation, did he ever state what exactly was the method he was going through? Like, was there a particular part of the hardware he was like connecting through for that ODE solution, or?
So he said that there were going to be two different approaches
Mm,
available. One was going to be a replacement, and one was going to be a pass through.
mm,
So again, I'll use this board as the example.
mm,
This is the daughter board that controls the CD-ROM. This is where the cable from the main board comes, and so that's the SCSI control connector. So if you could stick something else here and emulate this guy, you'd be okay. You could also stick something in between and kind of turn this guy off and replace him, right? But what he seemed to be implying was these connectors up here at the top are for the laser sled and the pickup.
mm,
And he seemed to be implying that, yeah, we can remodulate the output and simulate the laser itself.
Interesting.
And I mean, I have a really good book on how that all works. It's really technical. This thing here,
Understanding and
understanding and servicing CD players, and it goes into a fair bit of detail on specifically which chips are used. And I started looking into this, and it's the same set of chips almost in all the consoles.
Gotcha.
So you kind of just by reading this, you get a good sense of, well, how do they work? Well, it's not that you're communicating with the laser directly. You've got some standard chips that communicate with the laser and do all the tracking stuff, and you're just telling it, start playing. Don't, you can play, but don't play the music because I'm going to be accepting the digital output, and that's going to be considered data,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's that kind of a patchwork in there.
So that's convenient. I mean, just understanding that, you
Yeah,
could see why, Fixel might, easily be able to create, maybe not easily, but be able to create an ODE that is going
absolutely.
to work in a lot of different systems. Yeah.
Absolutely. If he could do that, that would be. I mean, it's not simple, but if
Yeah.
he could do that, that's like, yeah, you could replace the sled, so you can replace it in anything, and pretend that it's all there.
I think
We
it's important to note that I did request a refund for my pre-order from Fixel, and that was dealt with expediently. Additionally, I think he might have sent out a kind of a mass communication, just saying, "Hey, like, you know, there have been delays on this, and I haven't been able to." Fulfill these, and if correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was at least uh, the intention of a mass refund for pre-orders for like the PCFX, ODE, and possibly other ones that were, that
Yeah,
were
yeah,
put
he
up
he
for
did
pre-order.
he did state that, and I know that some of them gone out. I'm not sure if all of them have gone out by now. I know I received mine, and I'm not concerned about his ability to refund. It's more a question of how many hours in a day, and especially he's got some health problems. So
Yeah,
um,
things happen. So I wanted to just assure people that, as far as I'm concerned, it seems like what I'm seeing is like it's all being handled well. It's just, unfortunately, that particular promise for hardware for the PCFX hasn't yet been able to be fulfilled.
yeah, and I'm hoping that he can still make it. But as I say, in case he doesn't, in case other things come up, or in case he's stuck on the other systems and PCFX is down the list, I'm making sure that we've got the information available for somebody else.
One quick question I have is, we talked about how this process goes through like the CD drive, basically. Is there any key benefit that is different from the previous SCSI method you're talking about potentially being a thing in the future? Maybe I should say key benefit. Maybe that's the word. Between those two options, like
You
is
mean
one
between the laser and the SCSI?
yeah, in terms of going one way or the other.
Um, well, I guess benefit to the end user is it's probably easier to replace the drive at the top and plug in the cables.
Mm,
But benefit to the developer, it's going to be so much easier to just replace the entire board and connect to the main board.
gotcha. I haven't tried opening my PCFX, but every time I hear about it, it sounds like a nightmare of trying to reassemble the all the plastic pieces back together to get it
Yeah,
working
there's
again. So,
there's there's quite a lot of them, but iFixit's got a really nice teardown
mm,
article, which can be read in reverse to be a rebuild.
yeah.
Just make sure that you sort your screws.
I recently opened an NES, and that's a very simple piece of hardware, still incredibly stressful. So I was just
The
like,
the trick I learned is to have like an ice cube tray or some other kind of like series
mm,
of cubbies, and just be able to place screws in them as you take them out.
I like the idea of an ice cream, an ice cube tray. That's really good.
I actually have like this doesn't matter. I have a little heat pad thing because I also been trying to melt the bindings on books and things like that. And it also has slots for screws on there as well. So it's kind of nice. And they're magnetized, so they'll stay in there ideally. I mean, if you flip it over, they're out. But, ideally won't just fall somewhere. But anyways, so cool. Well, is there anything else you want to cover, David, before I kind of wrap up here?
Just I guess that anybody who wants to get into PCFX, check out the GitHub organization, and always looking for help on the documentation, especially.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Is like to kind of wrap up was in terms of what would be. Obviously, I think if somebody like me comes up and say, I would love to help, I don't really have the skill set to help you, right? What are kind of the things that you're looking for in terms of like if somebody wanted to volunteer their time to help out, and like what would that look like? What would be ideal for you, I guess, and the community as a whole?
Okay, ideal for me would be help in translating the Japanese documents to English.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if somebody could work together with me on specific, narrowly focused example programs for testing the functionality within libpcfx.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess those are the two main things.
And in terms of reaching you, would be joining the Discord and messaging you be the best approach, or is there a better place?
That's a good approach. Okay. I mean, as I say, there's the GitHub, there's Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does GitHub have like a messaging system or something as well?
Well, it's probably not the best way. I mean, if you had something specific to say about the PCFX info or something, either a pull request or an issue or something like that might be helpful.
So if you have a more specific thing you want to communicate to, GitHub might be good for that. But general reach out, Discord or Twitter would probably be the best two options.
Yeah, definitely that'd be the best.
Okay, awesome, cool. Well, thank you again so much for going through this. Sorry if I try to boil it down as best as possible, and I'm not technical, so I'm I don't know if what I'm saying just sounds like I didn't understand anything you said. But I try to put it together in a way that when I'm thinking about if somebody's listening and they don't know what any of this is, how do we sum up the last 5 minutes of technical explanation kind of thing? But it is interesting to hear all this stuff generally. So for me, at least. So I like it.
Glad to hear it.
Even if I don't understand a good chunk of it at times, but.
And definitely thank you so much, for the work that you're doing on this. I mean, I'm sure that, you're kind of self-motivated out of interest, but it's also, as you've said, this part of the work kind of needs to get done if, other people are going to be able to work on the hardware, develop software, all of those things. So it's really exciting. And, I think a public service of what you're working on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me, and hopefully it's helpful for other people, but yeah, it is the part that tends not to get a whole lot of attention.
Yeah, it is the hard work. It sounds like the hardest part of it, maybe. I mean, not that the other parts are easy, but this sounds like the kind of just slogging through the trenches to get to where you need to go in the first place in a lot of ways. And that's it for this episode. Thanks again for listening. Remember, if you want to join in on the community, feel free to join us on Discord, where we have a little online group you can join in and chat around. David chats in there too, so if you're curious to hear his musings around the PCFX on the more technical side, that stuff definitely happens in the Tech Talk stuff channel quite a bit. So you can also find David on Twitter at Shadoff_D, and we'll have links to his GitHub for the PCFX stuff in the description. Also links to Regis's GitHub as well if you want to check that out. Oh, and also don't forget to check out David's blocks as well if you want to try. I mean, it's just Tetris, just very quiet Tetris, but it is still interesting if you want to just check out some fun homebrew on your PCFX. Also, don't forget to submit that form if you're interested in participating in the 30th anniversary episode. Again, the deadline is December 1st, 2024. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next time.